With their invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022, the Russians had originally hoped for a blitzkrieg-style assault through the country, a quick march on the capital followed by the toppling of the Zelensky-led government and the installation of a pro-Russian one. Ukraine would remain independent in name only. It would shun the West in favor of a close relationship with Russia and in effect swear fealty to Vladimir Putin. Now obviously this hasn't occurred, and whilst significant territory remains under Russian control, a large portion of that was taken post-2014, in the civil war between the Kiev-based government and the Russian-backed rebel breakaway regions. If you remove those territories, the gains by Russia have been minimal and not nearly fitting of the great Russian war machine, that had clearly been overhyped during the Cold War and those years subsequent. Before we consider the current expected mobilization, let's talk about the reason for it: losses. The Russians have clearly had a bad time during the invasion brought on by questionable leadership, old tactics and a complete lack of respect for their foe. There are zero reliable estimates for their losses as almost everyone is biased. But either way, it's substantial. So, let's first visit what's out there and then we can agree a point somewhere in the middle. The Oryx website, which only measures machinery losses that can be verified photographically, has the total machinery losses at 8,560, of which 5,532 have been destroyed, damaged are 218, abandoned were 303, and the most startling number is the captured figure at 2,687. The captured figure alone would set back most attacking armies, especially when all you are doing is resupplying the enemy with more hardware than they had before you started. But it's the captured weaponry that is giving us the best clue as to just how bad the losses have been. You see, the Ukrainians are increasingly capturing old T-62 tanks on the battlefield. This is an indicator of just how deeply Russia is having to dig into reserves of old vehicles, and the situation is far worse than you might imagine. In theory, Russia has thousands of tanks waiting in giant warehouses and vehicles parks which can be reactivated. According to the Military Balance 2021, quoted in Kiev Independent, Russia has over 10,000 battle tanks in storage, mainly T-72s and T-80s. However, years of neglect and poor storage conditions, corruption and theft means that many of the vehicles have been cannibalized to keep the others running. Some have suggested that only 1 in 10 are still running, but it is hard to know how seriously to take this number. Very likely nobody, including the Russians, really knows. But now the shortage of modern types is forcing Russia to resort to T-62s. This type was first introduced in 1961, and the last one rolled off the Soviet production line in 1975, though North Korea continued to make them for another decade. It has a smaller and less powerful gun than later tanks, so it requires its own unique ammunition, which no doubt is coming in with the North Korean ammunition shipments. It also has less armor protection, though some captured examples have the useless coke cage seen at the start of the war, frameworks set over the turret in the vain hope they would cause anti-tank weapons to detonate before hitting the tank. The T-62 also lacks the autoloader introduced with the T-72, so it requires a crew of 4 rather than 3, a real headache for an army running short of trained tank crews. The lack of autoloader also means it has a slow rate of fire, which is a critical issue when you have to hit a target rapidly or be destroyed. More importantly, it lacks modern electronic gear like thermal imagers, a laser rangefinder and modern ballistic computer. This puts it at even more disadvantage in tank versus tank fights. The presence of T-62s indicates that, despite its theoretical armor reserve of thousands of tanks, Russia is running low on T-90s, T-80s, T-72s and T-64s, representing at least 3 generations of tank, and is now scraping the bottom of the tank barrel, so to speak. More and more T-62s are showing up in Ukraine. The first loss was in July and the second was not logged until September 16, but with the recent counteroffensive, numbers have been steadily mounting, and 17 have been recorded so far. It is a small proportion of the total but rising fast. But mobilizations are not done in terms of machinery losses, but rather losses in men. Now the most biased source when it comes to this topic has to be the General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. They have reported this week that at least 102,600 Russian soldiers have died since the start of the war. Given the distance between the front lines and effective medical support, the ratio of wounding to death would be low, roughly 4 to 1. That would mean that at least 400,000 Russian troops have been wounded. Obviously not all those would have been fatal, but still the numbers are massive, unrealistic some might say, including me. The other biased figure comes from the Russian government itself that last declared a figure towards the end of September, and that number was near 6,000 dead with no wounded number. So, at some point they just gave up reporting figures. It's estimated that Russia attacked Ukraine with 200,000 men and only started its mobilization for an additional 300,000 in September. That exercise would end up yielding an estimated 225,000, including numerous incidents that only highlighted the panic and lack of planning. If you then include the 50,000 men bought into the fight by Wagner PMC, you would get a total number of Russian combatants at just under 500,000. Now obviously there are timing differences and replacements were phased in, but most of the war has been fought without the mobilized troops, so the Ukrainian casualty figures are highly unlikely, at least initially. I am not going to put a figure on it because frankly who knows? I sincerely doubt even the Russians know how many they have lost, and of course they do not report Wagner losses. Clearly, it's a lot, because those mobilized troops didn't take long to make it to the front lines. Some of the mobilized Russian men were killed less than 2 weeks after being drafted, including one man who was killed near the Ukrainian city of Lysychansk on October 7, indicating that these troops were being sent to the front without any additional military training. This ran contrary to Putin's promise that all mobilized civilians would receive proper training before being sent into combat. Let's keep in mind, whilst all of this was happening, the slaughter has continued. Without knowing their exact losses, it's clear that things require additional troops and that involves another mobilization. But what's standing in the way of Russia successfully getting more troops to the front? We believe there are 3 aspects that are needed for this mobilization to work. Number 1. The military corps. Unfortunately, unlike their compatriots in the American Army, the Russians do not have a designated training cadre to prepare their troops, and they have generally relied on rotating experienced troops for the job. That would be fine in normal circumstances, but it would appear that a large portion of these troops or military corps have been killed or severely wounded in Ukraine, horribly impacting their ability to train new troops for the battleground. But almost more importantly, the lessons learned are not being filtered back as would be the norm. The Americans did it extremely well during their time in Afghanistan and Iraq, where troops were cycled stateside to teach the recruits what they had learned the hard way. Battle schools were established to deal with specific battle environment circumstances. It's also super important to ensure that units are seasoned with professional or experienced troops to improve battlefield performance, once again to teach the on-the-job skills needed to stay alive. Without these men, you find that units are getting exposed quicker, taking more casualties, and just generally being less effective. A diminished military corps also has an extremely negative impact on morale, something that is clearly happening in Ukraine, with significant desertions and surrenders. If you are recently mobilized, you will be thinking, if their top professional troops are getting killed so easily, what chance do I have? Morale has historically been the biggest breaker and maker of armies. The Ukrainians are more motivated than their Russian counterparts. This means they have better morale, and it shows in the results being experienced. In order to mitigate some of this, the Russians are training with the Belarusians. Whilst not combat veterans, they are fairly established and will assist the newer Russian cadres with basic training, weapons, logistics, and tactics. Finally, if there was a strong core within the military, it might have been able to insert some discipline into the mobilization drive, which has had numerous setbacks with troops protesting, drunkenness, and acting out. Either way, Russia is going to find it tough to train their troops properly given the current state of the military corps. This has been exposed by them rushing their soldiers into battle without much support or preparation. We will finalize this discussion in part 2 of this video. So please follow the link and join us. Please drop a like and subscribe. We would love to hear your comments and to enter into a discussion with us on the topic.